There are regional projects, but the African Union has also got that master plan. And you may wish to realize that right now, it's now recognized, because African leaders have spoken, that at the end of the day, apart from achieving Millennium Development Goals, we want our infrastructure to improve, we want electricity to improve, we want transportation to improve. And so now the basis of cooperation and negotiation is focusing on improving infrastructure. For example, for the Millennium Challenge Cooperation that has been mentioned, quite a big chunk of focus is now in improving infrastructure. And maybe what has changed now is that Africans are getting in the driver's seat to determine what they want and negotiating with partners. But at the end of the day, we are also giving priority in our own budgets in Africa to improve infrastructure. Thank you.
Let me just add briefly that the notion of regional cooperation, whether we're talking about in Africa or the Caribbean, is a critical factor in this. And we're here to speak in terms of progress, so we need to speak frankly. And in point of fact, when you look at both in the Caribbean and when you look in Africa, that many times both people in leadership and people in positions of influence have seen their parochial concerns to be more important than regional concerns, whether it's tribal or whether it's national or whether it's part of some other grouping within an area. And unless and until people decide to get past the fact that it's more important to be part of the Caribbean community than to be a Bayesian, that it's more important to be a part of the African Union than to be from Zambia, that they, just as people are here from Kentucky and people are here from Tennessee and people are here from California, but we find a way to work together as Americans. The United States of Africa may not come to pass in the same formal way that you have the United States of America, but certainly the African Union and also CARICOM need to be key factors with respect to this. Otherwise, the Congresswoman and her colleagues can raise as many billions of dollars as you want. It's not going to produce the results unless there is not only you're talking about a physical infrastructure, but also a governmental and procedural infrastructure to be able to implement these things.
May I add briefly that in order to achieve what Wallace is pointing at, we must understand that patience is very important. And I say that as an impatient person. Patience is going to be important because we have to understand the devastation that has been done to us physically and mentally. And coming back from that is more than just waking a patient up.
Can you hold on? The microphone is heading to you. We need to be able to hear your question.
As an African from the diaspora, I'm a Caribbean African. We sit here today and we talk about coming together. I hope it's not a theory and we could put it into practice, because every time we come together and we talk about getting together, we still do not do it. We talk about going all over the world, putting it together. How come we are not going out there in schools and other places and reach the grassroots people and say, listen, let us all come together. I work in the schools and the children do not know I'm related to them, right? Because they are not taught. We could sit here today and talk the theory, but I hope all of y'all could go out there in the grassroots community and send out that message. We all are Africans in the diaspora.
I think we have just one more question. Time for just one more question.
Good afternoon. My name is Carmen Morris, born in Kingston, Jamaica. Grew up in Miami, Florida, and doing work in Benin, West Africa. I want to commend you for doing this because it is so important for us to build bridges because we are one. Would like to ask a question because the work that we are doing in Benin, West Africa has to do with child slavery, the fact that there's still modern-day slavery. How can we effectively tweak the laws here for trade so that when major corporations go to the motherland, or any country for that matter, they won't tap into child labor use children who are enslaved from the age of 3 years old to produce their products. How can we effectively do that? How can we make education, the basics, accessible to these children? Please, I know you can't answer it in one fell swoop, but can you give us some direction so we can really begin to effectively deal with it at the legislative level as well as on the ground floor? Thank you.
Yeah. One of the things that we do at Good Works International is we represent major companies going to, excuse me?
You're on my advisory board.
Right. Right, and one of the things that's important to understand is that U.S. companies, thanks to the legislation that's in place through Congress, and have to comply with the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. They just must do that, and some people think that's a disadvantage for U.S. companies as they compete against companies from other countries that don't have those same levels of restriction and reporting and oversight. But one of the things that these companies must do is, of course, they have to comply with the rules and regulations of the countries and where they are doing business. That's an important part of the reports that they provide back to the U.S. government, and they have to comply. So my point, of course, is that where the countries in question, wherever it may be, if they have laws on the books that they're enforcing against, in this instance, child labor, then it makes it a lot easier for these companies to be in a position to be in compliance. And nobody's doing these things out of the goodness of their heart. They'll do it out of compliance because they have to do it because they have to do it in order to be in compliance with U.S. laws where their home base may be. And so my point is that, again, it's not to shift the blame by any means, but understand that unless and until countries in Africa or in Asia or wherever it may be where they have these concerns in place, unless their governments are going to take the lead in saying, no, child labor is illegal. We will enforce against child labor, and that we're not going to countenance this type of activity, there will be companies that will look to take advantage of this situation. So it's important that there be compliance, if you will, or congruence, if you will, of the efforts of the countries in question.
I'd just like to add or to amplify that somebody in Benin is benefiting from that practice. So they need to be worked on that end.
People are indicating they have other questions. I'm sorry, we are just out of time. I just want to applaud this panel for being here today, and thank you all. I want to say two things before our concluding remarks from Congresswoman Lee. First, that the State of the Black World Conference is another opportunity to continue this dialogue. It will be in New Orleans, November 19th through the 23rd. But before then, the African Union is having its diaspora conference in South Africa, October 6th to 8th. The African Union reaching out to all of you as Region 6 of Africa, as the diaspora. And South Africa is hosting this extraordinary gathering. So you should all know about it, be there, be engaged, be involved in the follow-on policies and practices coming out of that meeting. There are many opportunities, but I also encourage Barbara Lee to do this again next year, because we need that here as well, continuing the dialogue on ways to bridge the gap. Thank you.
Thank you. And Amira, thank you, first of all, for the heavy lifting that you did today. I really appreciate your serving as our moderator, and really for your leadership and making sure that we're aware, just as you just did, of where more opportunities are for us to come together. So thank you so much. Let me once again thank all of our panelists. You know, listening to all of you excited me, really. I chair the subcommittee, the Global Affairs Subcommittee of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. And I want everyone to know that this is being recorded. And all of your suggestions and your testimony we will have available. And we're going to go through and look at what we can follow up on. This is not just today. I always want to know, where do we go from here? What is our action plan? What next? And so we will meet our subcommittee, and we will take all of these thoughts, the presentations, and the very unbelievably exciting suggestions. I mean, and think about Bermuda and the type of opportunities for our African American businesses and your tourist development, Dr. Brown. You know, it would be just great if we could, you know, figure that piece out. And all of you had such unbelievable suggestions. I've already talked to Julianne and told her we're definitely, I serve on the Foreign Affairs or Foreign Operations Subcommittee of Appropriations. also on the Education Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee. So your suggestions and some of the things we just need to do legislatively, trust me, we're going to figure out how to do that. And let me just mention one effort that several of us in the Black Caucus mounted a few years ago, and how these ideas and some of the work that we do during this weekend and during our travels can come to fruition. Well, there are many of us who believe we need to end the embargo against Cuba. I mean, it's just a 40-year policy that hasn't worked, and we need to end it, right? We need to end it. And some of us work day and night on that. I mean, I've been there 17 times, since the 70s. The policy still hasn't changed much, but we believe that the Black Caucus has been we know the Black Caucus is in the forefront to try to change our policy. Well, there were several members of the Black Caucus down in Cuba several years ago, and we visited the Latin America Medical School. And we saw these wonderful, bright young people going to medical school in Cuba for free. And the only commitment they had to make was to go back to their countries and be doctors, provide the type of medical care that their populations needed and deserved. And so Congresswoman Waters, Benny Thompson, myself, we had a meeting, and we said to Fidel Castro, we said, we have so many students, African-American students, bright, can't get into medical school for whatever reason, can't afford it for whatever reason, and we cited all of the reasons that we thought we could have some of our African-American students come to this medical school. Well, it was an uphill battle, as you can imagine. We had to fight with Secretary Powell once we were able to get 60 of our students there, but we were able to make sure that they have that opportunity. And I'm very pleased. I think I had 3 or 4 students in my own district who have graduated and who are now practicing. We had the first graduating class last year, 60 students from the United States, primarily African American and Latino students, graduated, and they're back here now providing medical care in Harlem and Oakland, in the South, in communities where, because we still haven't figured out how to provide health care, access to health care in the wealthiest and most powerful country in the world, and can't figure out how to help our students pay for medical care, we found this opportunity for our students to go to Cuba. And I just share that because, out of, meetings and discussions, and when you see that kind of opportunity and have a vision, people of African descent can do wonders. And so this panel has shared with us their insights, but I also want all of you to know and be energized and feel empowered to go back to your communities, tell your members of Congress, first of all, to support what the Congressional Black Caucus is doing, but also go back to your communities and develop, a committee, develop some kind of a forum that in your own communities you can begin to replicate this dialogue and do some things that makes sense in terms of connecting us all. Finally, let me just say the Durban 2 conference is coming up pretty soon. Yes, we will have a delegation there. We may have to fight, but we will be there dealing with racism in the world. And it's been a fight in Congress to try to make that statement. But members of the Black Caucus, we all are fighting to make sure we have African American representation at this Durban 2 conference. I want to thank Tatiana. Now, first, I have to just share this with you. Tatiana is from Malawi on my staff, my executive assistant who pulled all this together. She's a daughter of, Malawi. Phenomenal woman, brilliant, brings a whole perspective to our office that wouldn't be there if she weren't there. And Nicole from St. Lucia, she's in my office. Unbelievable woman. I have my Shirley Chisholm educational scholarship program. It's sitting over there in the Senate, but Nicole helped write that bill, got it over to the Senate, and now today I have to find Secretary Rice because I want him to get it off the floor because we need those scholarships for students from the Caribbean to be able to come to America. But Nicole did all that, so thank you, Nicole. Thank all of you for being here, and we will definitely have the record for you, and again, have a productive weekend.
Girl child. So we are so honored for her to be here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you very much for that very interesting and nice introduction. My name is Ambassador Hawan Delowe, the Malawi ambassador to the United States of America. And Malawi is in the southern eastern part of Africa, and it's normally called the warm heart of Africa, mostly because of the warmth of the people, but also because of the beauty of the country. I have 5 minutes to share about the issue of the importance of bridging the gap, Americans, Africans, and Caribbeans. First, indeed, I do agree. We need to reconnect. At times, we do feel sometimes there is a disconnect, and so this needs to be addressed. How is this going to be addressed? I believe that we need to rediscover ourselves in terms of who we are as a people. We have common history, but a common source as well. We also have to understand our beliefs and values, and especially the strong values that are very important for us to work together and make a difference. As ambassadors in the United States, we have a committee of African Diplomatic Corps, African ambassadors. We do meet every month, and we have also been having sessions with Congressman Payne to try and promote African interests in Congress. But why should we reconnect? First, I do believe that we are stronger as a team to make a difference to our peoples. Secondly, I do believe that we are now pursuing a 21st century Pan-Africanism, which really focuses on development and making a difference to our people. Our job as ambassadors is to build relations. And these relations for what? The relations to improve the quality of lives of our people. And now our focus is actually development diplomats other than the traditional political diplomats. And so we are focusing on building these relations here in the US. But apart from that, the other region of the continent, which is the African diaspora. And so with the focus on us rediscovering ourselves, trying to understand and appreciate each other, as well as working together, the Africans in the diaspora, our friends in the Caribbean, so that at the end of the day we should work together to improve the quality of the lives of our people. I just have some few suggestions of the kind of things that we can do. First of all, it is very clear that to bring about understanding, we have to share information of who we are, because sometimes there's a lack of understanding. What we've been doing in the various embassies, we have various programs. One of those is where we can be able to invite students from various schools to visit our embassies, and we can share with them information about our countries, about our culture, about our values. For example, one value that we think it's important, it's a point of strength, is the Ubuntu spirit. I'm sure we have heard about it. It's the spirit that is in the Africans about caring for one another. When you appreciate this and see how we can draw this for us to work from a point of strength, we realize that we have something going. Apart from the program of inviting students to visit our embassies, we also have a program where African ambassadors are working with a group of faith-based organizations of Black Americans here. And there we have a program. They do have a Pan-African festival that they organize, working together with African ambassadors. Now they have a program, apart from just exchanging information, of also trying to link back with Mother Africa. And so they're organizing, they've been organizing tours to visit Africa, not only just to understand the cultures, but also some practical work in terms of improving education, health, and economic empowerment. Thirdly, we do realize as well that as a people, there's an issue of image that we need to work on. Because sometimes the image that goes out there is just an image of helplessness, and yet we know that Africa is not poor. It's just the people who are poor. 50% of the resources, the minerals, for example, in the world come from Africa. And so we do believe that it's up to us to take the challenge to drive a program of addressing the image issue, so that at the end of the day, it is very clear that we're working from the point of hope for us to utilize the resources that we have, use the values that we have, so that we can make sure that we prosper. In addition to that, we also do believe that at the end of the day, if we are going to improve the quality of lives of our people, we need to re-energize. If we look back at the initial Pan-Africanism, the kind of passion that was there to fight oppression, apartheid, we believe that this needs to come back in terms of now looking at development issues. And so, apart from sharing information so that we understand each other better, cultural events to understand the cultures, but also in terms of reconnecting back with the motherland, there's the issue of improving education, health, and economic empowerment, so that we can promote increased trade and investment with Mother Africa. As I've said, the opportunities are there. But at the end of the day, it's up to us to now to get practical and get going, so that at the end of the day, the 21st century Pan-Africa can be real in terms of improving the quality of lives of our people. Thank you very much.
Brilliant charge from Ambassador Ndeloe. It leads us well to our next speaker, who is Wallace Ford. He is the President and Chief Operating Officer of Good Works International, with a focus on economic development.
Thank you and good morning. Good morning. Yes, we're still here. Okay. I was a number of years ago when I was a student at Dartmouth College. I worked as a professional actor in New York as well. And when I was a student at Harvard Law School, I had a 13-piece band. The reason I mention that is that there's something about public performance that you learn, which is that you don't ever want to, the rule is you don't ever follow a star act. You don't want to follow a star act, because then you're at something of a disadvantage. Of course, I'm following, just as keeping count, 6 members of Congress, a prime minister, and an ambassador. So I want to thank the organizers for placing me in this daunting role, and of course, in some ways, I guess I feel like Sarah Palin, and of course, the bar is very low for me. As I said, I don't have to accomplish very much at this point just to kind of keep up. So. But we will do the best that we can. Good morning. I think we're still, no, good afternoon. I do want to say, first of all, it's a real pleasure to be a part of today's program, and I want to follow another rule I learned in law school, which is that when you have a limited amount of time to speak, you tell people what you're going to say, you say it, tell them what you said, and be quiet. So we're going to try to do that. We're here to talk about economic development, and we're here to talk about the bridge between the United States and Africa and the Caribbean and Latin America. My role specifically dealing on the area of economic development and business development. That is actually what I do for a living, and my colleagues and I from Good Works International is what we do every day and what the company has been doing for some 12 years. Good Works International is an international business consulting firm that indeed forms a bridge between commercial interest in the United States and Africa and the Caribbean. We have 3 offices in the U.S., in Washington, in New York, and Atlanta. We also have 7 offices in Africa, in Abidjan, in Accra, in Abuja, in Lagos, in Luanda, in Kigali, in Rwanda, and also in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. I make mention of that because, indeed, that gives us a very real-world, real-time presence in Africa. We also are very active in the Caribbean, representing interest in Antigua and Barbuda and in Turks and Caicos and in Jamaica in the past, and we're about to start work in St. Vincent's, and we'll continue in that regard. It gives us a perspective, ladies and gentlemen, with respect to this whole issue that we're talking about in terms of a bridge. What is going to constitute the components, if you will, of that bridge? We all understand the need for it. We all understand that indeed there are many aspects of that are already in place. The question is, how do we make that bridge a real and functioning aspect of what we do as individuals, what we do in our respective organizations and professional pursuits, and what we do for the future. What we're saying, in effect, is that we're looking for something, not just a virtual bridge, but an actual bridge. Now, you can imagine during the course of the presentation so far, I had a presentation in mind, and then these everybody's ideas come and sparks start flying, and I said, well, there's only a few things that we want to talk about. And let me, by the way, just Good Works International was founded by Andrew Young and Carl Masters 12 years ago. It has been an historic organization, and we continue to go forward. Now, a couple of my colleagues from Good Works are here, and I'd like to ask them just to stand briefly if you could recognize them. There's just, yes, thank you. And as I said, we are focusing in business development, and we're looking at it in a very strategic fashion. I know there was a big discussion about the difference between strategy and tactics last night, and then hopefully John McCain will figure it out at some point, but we're not going to worry about that. The strategy that we are following, however, is looking at specific business areas, and we're looking at the business areas of agribusiness, financial services, health-related services, infrastructure, energy, and telecommunications. We believe those are the key areas for business development in Africa and in the Caribbean, and also in Central America as well, that we need to focus upon. That's not to the exclusion of other areas, ladies and gentlemen, but we believe those areas are extremely important to go forward. In addition to which, we believe that the organizations that are already in place, the Africa Union, CARICOM, COMESA, SADC, ECOWAS, and others, are extremely important linkages on which we have to focus. In closing, let me just say this. There is one unspoken element with respect to business development and commercial development in Africa and the Caribbean that we have to address, and that is the issue of security sector reform. You cannot have business development, you cannot have sustainable commercial development without also security sector reform. Rule of law has to be in place. That's not dictatorial rule of law we're talking about, but you have to have a respect for lawful procedures. You have to have a commercial environment in which business can go forward. That means that personal security has to be in place. That means that tangible security for goods and services has to be in place. There is a reason, ladies and gentlemen, why 70% of the foreign direct investment into Africa is dealing with extractive activities, taking out the gold, taking out the diamonds, taking out the oil, taking out whatever it may be, processing it someplace else where there's no added value at the end of the day. Security sector reform in Africa, security sector reform in the Caribbean has to be a watchword, if you will, of what takes place. And I can tell you here at Good Works, what we have done is we've established a security sector reform action committee so that in the future discussions we've discussed this with certainly members of the caucus, Congresswomen, we will continue to move forward with respect to this. When we're talking about aid, when we're talking about investment, when we're talking about development, when we're talking about progress in Africa and the Caribbean and Latin America, also security sector reform will be a part of that. And before the hook comes out, I want to thank you all for I want to thank the organizers again, and particularly Congressman, for having this particular forum. It has been a real pleasure to be a part of it, and we look forward to participating in the new administration that we're all looking forward to in the new year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We move from Good Works to education, and we understand security comes when people have good jobs and can send their children to school, and so we are really honored to have Dr. Julianne Malveaux to talk about empowering the future generations through education. She is the president of Bennett College, and we're honored to have her here today. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much, Omari, for the introduction. Thank you, Congresswoman Lee, for your constant leadership for social and economic justice for people both here and in the diaspora. Of course, I bring you greetings from Bennett College for Women, an oasis where we educate and celebrate women and develop them into 21st century leaders and global citizens. I've got some students in the house, and I would like to ask them to stand. Misha White, our student body president. Brooke Shields, student body vice president. I believe our associate provost, Dr. Stanley Viltz, is back there somewhere. But we want to make sure that wherever we are, our students are absolutely present. I also want to thank my good friends at Good Works for the work that you all did to help us this summer, bring some of our students to the continent. Jill Bishop was just delightful in helping us have many amenities. And we were in your Dar es Salaam office, was very helpful. And my dear friend Mark Walton, who made sure that I got there at a reasonable price. Thank you, Mark. And this brother is the bomb. The Africa Channel is bringing us what we need to have, because basically we are not doing the work we need to do to understand the continent. In other words, we all talk about being Africanists, and many of us are, but the fact is that, if you get in a DC cab, the brother will tell you, where you from? Africa. There are 52 sub-Saharan countries with very distinct cultures and other things. We need to lift up the differences in the ways, as my brother says, that currency is dealt with, some very vibrant stock markets, some that are not so vibrant, very different kinds of cultures, whether or not you're near water or not makes lots of differences with trade. But we at Bennett College for Women, I have been president for about 15 exciting months. And the work that we've done is to align our curriculum with what it means to be a 21st century citizen. And part of what it means to be a 21st century citizen is to have travel and international travel in your portfolio. If you cannot leave the United States, you see yourself as nothing more than somebody who defined you as a slave. See, if you go somewhere else, you see yourself as part of a continuum. On my way to Dar es Salaam, I spent the night in Addis. And if you go to museums in Addis and you see what Christians were doing before Christians called themselves Christians, you understand it did not just start here. And so we need students, when they play, not only to think about technology and languages, but also seeing yourself in a world that's bigger than your world. So although we've had a very short time, and those folks who are my friends, Congresswoman has heard me, Mark Walton has heard me begging, Ambassador Young has heard me say, it is my goal within 5 years that every woman who goes to Bennett will leave the country going somewhere for some period of time. But it's absolutely critical for all of us to look at the ways African American students are the least likely to do international travel. And here's why. 92% of our students at Bennett receive financial aid. 45% are first generation. It's hard for me to make a case for somebody who's working 24/7 that you have to give up some money for your child to leave the country. So Congresswoman Lee and Congressman Conyers has heard me. He's tired of hearing me. His wife is on our board. Y'all need to write some money in. And I know that there's a $700 billion, and we're not going to talk about that today because I only have 5 minutes. But we ought to really invest in banks instead of let the banks run away with us, for the record. But somewhere in some of these appropriations and earmarks, McCain used to like earmarks until he decided he didn't like earmarks. McCain, never mind. We just got to pray on him. And sisters, until that woman is not elected vice president, we should boycott lipstick because she gives lipstick a bad name. I mean, she's put lipstick on everything, pigs and cows and pit bulls, and, I don't even want lipstick anymore. But the fact is that somehow in some of this writing of earmarks, we need to write something that talks about those who have underutilized international experiences having that opportunity, and especially through the HBCUs. And let me tell y'all, if we didn't have HBCUs, we would have to invent them. There are 105 of us, 105. There are 4,000 institutions of higher education in the United States. So we represent 2% of the continuum. We produce 13% of the African Americans who get BA degrees today. We're not going back to the good old days where you couldn't go anywhere else. We're saying today, this day now, we do the heavy lifting in higher education. And so I want all of you to understand that when we educate young people around global studies, and the 4 priorities of the Malvo administration at Bennett are global understanding, entrepreneurship, leadership, and communications. And so Mark knows we had 4 students at the New Media Institute. They went to 3 countries. They went to Ghana, they went to South Africa, and they went to Tanzania. And they did what you do as a journalist. We dropped them there. And these young sisters were able, no background, to produce stories about soccer in Ghana. They didn't know anything about soccer, but they were able to do it because they were good reporters. And this is the kind of exposure that we need. We're only going to have it when we, folks in this room, say our young people will leave this country. When we leave this country, we see the world in a totally different way. And it's not just the African continent. We must go throughout the diaspora. We must be in Latin America. We must be in Australia. Yes, we must go to Europe, holding our nose, but go anyway. We must go to China. You know, we must go to India, where they're producing more engineers than we are. We must understand how education works there and does not work here, and then we need to go back to our inner cities, lift up our brothers and sisters, and say we are a global and timeless people, something we will not understand in a broken down school in a hood, but we understand when we leave this country and understand how great we are. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Malveaux. Thank you for the Sisters of Bennett who are here. And this is also a wonderful way to segue to our next guest, who is Mark Walton, Executive Vice President of Sponsorship of the Africa Channel. We began with a film that the Africa Channel put together, and now we're going to, as we close, hear Mark speak. Welcome, Mark.
That's the original way that we used to communicate. And now we have television. And television is really going to change and make what we're talking about happen today. So I'm going to give you this, in case I run over, you know, you can just kind of give me the little drum. Boy, I'm so happy to be here. And Wallace, if you feel that you were under some pressure, I just had to follow all of those people, yourself and Dr. Malveaux. So I will see if I can at least put a little media framework on this. We're a media company that's your friend. I hope you got the essence from that video, that we are trying to demystify Africa, that we are trying to put a face on Africa that people have just never seen before, especially on their television sets. And that the idea behind that is that once you now see yourself in a much more positive light, once you see yourself, the richness of Africa, you start to appreciate yourself, and you start to appreciate how you can relate to someone else. This is an incredible undertaking. I worked professionally in media, worked at CBS, and had my own company distributing programs, and the CEO of this company is from Zimbabwe, named James Makawa. He has a name from Malawi. Came to me, and we had been friends, and he said, you know, I got this thing I want to talk to you about. And I think it was on the spot when I realized that if we do this the right way, we can change the course of history for the better, for us. And it's a simple formula that we're trying to employ. We are going to the continent of Africa. We are sourcing the best television programming that shows contemporary Africa. We are then packaging it, yes, here in the United States, where we have some technical skills, and then we're distributing it around the world. And that's the beauty of this. It's a global network. So not only are we in major cities in the United States, but we are in the UK, and we'll soon be in France, because we have to have a French language version of this in order to be able to communicate with more of the African world. We're also in the Caribbean. I'm proud to say we're in the Bahamas, we're in Jamaica, we're in Trinidad, and we're in the place of my family's birth in Barbados. My father actually is probably one of the most knowledgeable people, even though he doesn't have a college education. And when I told him that I was going to join the Africa Channel, he said, well, you know, you've been in training for this all your life. Because, in fact, I'm a first generation born here in the States. My wife's from Senegal. I've been traveling the continent of Africa for 20 years. I've been to 14, 15 countries. But working in traditional media, I could never talk about it. I could never do anything with it. I'd come back from Africa and people would say, so, the people, what are they doing there? Are they, you know, they have shoes, and what do your in-laws do? And, you know, and these are Ivy League educated people who just have been laboring under the misconceptions of what Africa really is all about, because they haven't been intellectually curious enough to step outside of where their framework is to understand what it is. Those days are gone. The Africa Channel is here. So we're on the front line. And I was in Barbados about 2 weeks ago, and I was sitting in the hotel room, and I realized that the experience that I was having was one that just brought incredible joy to my life. I'm watching CNN, and I flipped the dial, and I watched another network, and then I flipped the dial, and I watched the Africa Channel. And I wore my Africa Channel hat downstairs, and then I saw that the people at the desk said a little something to me like, you know, we used to hope that there would be something that would help show us what life in Africa was about. So I realized that we are actually on the front line of connecting these dots. And this is the point when I have to stop and say thank you to all of you for your support, but especially to the members of Congress that have helped us get this channel distributed. Congresswoman Lee single-handedly has rallied the forces to make sure that our members, our leadership, are behind us in talking to all of the distribution outlets that need to know that we are in fact a useful media platform to have. So I always want to say thank you. I'm so sorry that all of our members are going back to do this work that they have to do, but I'm happy that you're here to at least hear me say thank you again. I'm going to rattle off because I only have 1 minute, just a few of the things that happened because we're on the ground. A woman in the UK called the channel and told us that she had come from an African country. She had never told her kids about where they came from, but after watching the channel, she decided that she would start telling them because she became proud of what she saw. We do sweepstakes in all the cities that we launch, and we get thousands of people to come to their cable channel and ask for the Africa channel. Some of them never had cable before. I talked about being in Barbados. Well, we're also in Trinidad. Now, this surprised me, but in Trinidad, the marketing people there were so excited about the Africa channel and our connection with African Ancestry that does DNA testing that they wanted to get kits that they could give away as premium items to just get people excited about reclaiming their roots. You saw that show Generations, one of the soap operas that was in the video. It's actually one of the most popular shows in Jamaica. When we get calls from people that say, I'm so happy that you're showing beautiful black people, that you're showing us looking so good. And just scratch your head and realize that we've never had an African-American soap opera, and we've had lots of media in this world, in this country. I know my time is short. Probably one of the most impactful things that happened is I was riding the bus from Atlanta. I was going back to New York, and I was talking with an African-American woman, bus driver for the Avis, and I don't ask the question, do you watch the Africa Channel anymore? I ask, what do you watch? And she said, I watch that show Studio 53 because I now know where I want to take my mother, who I've always promised to take her to the continent. I now know where I can take her. And that's when I realized that what we're doing in a very small way, and again, I'm very happy to be included in the conversation, is that we're changing people's perceptions in their living rooms because we all will not be able to make that journey. So thank you. I'm going to try to adhere to some semblance here, and I hope we have some time for some questions and answers. Thanks. Thank you.
Well, I know we had hoped to have time for question and answer, and because of this extraordinary panel, doesn't look like we will be able to have question and answer. But before we have concluding remarks from Congresswoman Lee, I just want to thank you all for being here at this historic first event, connecting the dots, being able to build linkages between Africa, the Caribbean, Europe, throughout the diaspora. Because we aren't having a Q&A, I just want to point out, especially I know there are many of you in this audience that are doing extraordinary work on behalf of the African diaspora. I want to just take a second to point out Trans-Africa Forum, long history of involvement and dedicated work for the justice for the African world. So look to them, look to many of other advocates.